The grand tradition of the story-based DLC, where cheap, shorter games that are built off the main product are produced in order to provide more fun, more plot, or more boredom to the audience and fans of the original game for the sake of the devil's advocate, let's call it a nominal fee. As many people will attest, the concept of DLC itself is great. Support for great titles after the game is released that isn't super expensive, but then everything changed when the industry started demanding more money. The problem with the tradition is that the industry wants its cake and to eat it as well, so we usually end up with easy to produce multiplayer map DLC and gun packs, while story DLC and new campaigns are actually difficult to make since you are essentially producing a Steam game alongside the actual game. Some companies do it, and you sometimes get some great things like Ram Shadow from Gears of War 3 or the Dead Space 3 Aftermath, and preceding those two comes F.E.A.R 2 Reborn, a pack made to try and keep the idea of the expansion pack alive from the original F.E.A.R's release. However, this DLC is one of the oddest examples of DLC I have ever seen. It has literally and absolutely nothing to do with the original title Project Origin. Not a damn thing, except maybe that it takes place in roughly the same period of time and in the same city spanning conflict. That is nuts. You want us to get invested in this totally new character with about 1/6 of the time on screen that the main game had to accomplish the same thing. Ha! Well, let's look at it the other way. Maybe they managed to create a better first-person shooter protagonist like the good men of Battlefield's B Company. To answer that question, let's just say that Monolith went at this development asking itself, is it possible to scare a robot? Because for this disconnected bit of content, our main character is Foxtrot. And if you know your army lingo, that means that this character's actual name is the letter F. That's something to think about. He's involved in the ongoing campaign of Replica vs. Armacham as Alma's influence continues to keep them alive. Foxtrot rocks up in a power suit and pastes everything he encounters for the first 10 minutes, and thank you for noticing. Monolith did actually go through the effort to totally redesign the game's HUD from the original title, making this DLC an even more baffling change from Project Origin. It's a nice cosmetic change, and let's just leave it at that. When Foxtrot gets back to base, things get a bit squirrely as he listens to the Replica's radio for a bit and suddenly acquires F.E.A.R's trademark bullet time mechanic and gets thrust into a mental maelstrom of nonsense and has to kill nightmare creatures under orders from a familiar voice.
They are meaningless now. They are ghosts. You must set me free.
Let's see if the viewers at home can guess who it is. If you guess Paxton Fettel, then you officially get 75 YouTube points. Well done! Yes, it seems that Paxton is still around, so this might end up being a prequel to the events of F.E.A.R Extraction Point, if Monolith still cared about Time Gate's continuity instead of binning it as easily as the Star Wars extended universe. What follows is one of Monolith Productions' patented ideas that look great on paper, but ended up muddied through bad execution. The problem is that Reborn is not scary, like Dead Space 3 Aftermath was. Beyond the reveal that Paxton Fettel was gaining control of a replica soldier and gave him the power to cut his way through his old comrades to a promise of enlightenment, the game is just shooting the dudes. Other than some attempts to do some Call of Duty style revamps by setting shootouts in sideways office buildings to illustrate the continued collapse of the town without a name, there's nothing else here. It's just constant shooting the replica dudes and the remaining Armacham wingnuts. It's so much of a shoot fest, but some of the arenas end up being bullshittily dense with bad guys, which isn't a lot of fun when the game is so irregular with the damage being dealt. Sometimes your health will be chipped away in a forgettable fashion, but then 2 seconds later you end up dead on the ground at full health because some hidden jackass was holding a shotgun. I gave the original F.E.A.R shit, but at least the game told you where all the damage was coming from. The only real justification for the lack of everything going on is Paxton's constant come-hither speeches and promises of the truth, is that the game is heart-stoppingly short, and because it's so much shorter than the original game, it ends up being hyper-linear, like a literal A to B line drawn by an unimaginative 6-year-old. The only goal is to get Foxtrot past the phalanx of replicas to ground zero of the Armacam nuking, since Paxton happens to be there. I suppose that makes sense. Armacam blew up their original office building to bury Alma, and Paxton's corpse was incinerated in that explosion, so he probably did the Alma thing and became an undead psychic force that was, I don't know, trapped in an invisible mine box? Science! It's a good thing that Reborn gives the player 100% of the bullet time upgrades right at the start, since after you get to ground zero, you would have realized that this DLC is only 60 minutes long. A good round hour that Monolith developed after the game's full development, and Warner Brothers charged the flippin' $10 for. The only reason this story is justified is just for the ending cutscene, where Foxtrot is met by Paxton's spirit, and he transfers his consciousness into Foxtrot to become the new Paxton Fettel, which is an amazing idea, using the game's established plot to create a twist ending instead of just throwing a Hail Mary and hoping it sticks to something. But when the idea is padded with a bunch of copy-paste arenas and generic shootouts, and all of the horror is sucked out, what you get is a section that should have been quietly advertised as a $5 handout, not a grand new quote-unquote campaign being sold under generous guise of $10 as an amazing interactive experience. Hardly, it's an unfortunate day when you realize that just like Battlefield Bad Company, the original F.E.A.R was actually the best that Monolith had to offer. And similar to the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, it seems that the original game was only good by accident, since Monolith took away from the original game's reception that players were coming to it for some shooty bang bang time, instead of being hidden in the constant shadow of Alma. I will say that at least Monolith and Warner Brothers were trying in this case, instead of simply being hackjob shysters looking for some profit in name recognition. It's just a shame that they actually aren't good at making games. Maybe F.E.A.R 3, or F.E.A.R, as the game box would have you say it, will change my mind, but I kinda doubt it. It'll still be next week's feature to stay tuned for. Anyway, let's wrap this up with a final downloadable scoreboard. And a victory for gamers, because we all damn well deserve it. Thanks for watching.